"I want a child from you," said the native woman to the lonely rancher. The sun over Sulphur Springs burned white as molten steel. Ethan Vance swung his hammer against a broken hinge, each strike echoing through the empty corral. The air shimmered, heavy with dust and the smell of hot iron. Then the wind shifted, and he looked up. A lone rider stood at the edge of the valley, her horse motionless, her dark hair bound with a strip of leather. The woman didn't move, didn't speak. She simply watched him, eyes steady as flint. When she finally dismounted, the world seemed to narrow between them, the quiet rancher and the stranger who carried the desert in her gaze. "I came to ask for something," she said. Her voice was low, certain. "I want a child from you." The hammer slipped from his hand and hit the dirt with a sound that split the silence wide open. By midsummer of 1881, the Sulphur Springs Valley lay under a white, merciless sky. The ground cracked like old bone, and the wind that came down from the Chiricahua Mountains carried the dry tang of rust. Nothing moved except the buzzards and the dust. At the far edge of that silence stood Dust Haven Ranch, a scatter of weathered boards, a half-working windmill, and one man who still believed it was worth holding together. Ethan Vance had lived there alone for 3 years, long enough for the fences to sag, the tools to dull, and the memory of his wife and child to fade only in daylight. Never at night. He spoke little, wrote nothing, and kept to the rhythms that dulled pain: mend, feed, fix, sleep. The house still held her touch, though the small cloth doll on the shelf, the loop of embroidered thread that once bore the name Lily. He rarely went into Dry Creek Settlement. Folks there whispered about him, the rancher who buried his family and shut the gate on the world. Ethan didn't mind. Isolation had a kind of mercy. But that morning, the stranger's words, "I want a child from you," had cut through it like a blade. As dusk settled, he sat by the open door, watching the wind twist through the brittle grass. Her face kept returning in his mind, sun-touched skin, a gaze that carried both defiance and weariness. She hadn't been from the settlement. The beads on her sleeves, the way she held her horse by the reins of braided sinew, all of it spoke of the Apache. For a man like Ethan, those signs were supposed to mean distance, even danger. Yet what he'd seen was something else, a steadiness that refused fear. He rose, poured water from the barrel, and washed the grit from his hands when he caught his reflection in the window glass. The man staring back looked older than his 36 years gray around the eyes, shoulders stooped from too many silent winters. He wondered what she had seen in him that made her believe he could give anything worth keeping. Outside, the sky burned to copper. Coyotes called from the ridges, their cries thin against the vastness. The air smelled of mesquite smoke from some distant camp, maybe hers. He pictured her there, sitting by a small fire, eyes fixed on the horizon. A name rose unbidden to his lips: Ehala. Somehow it fit. He didn't know yet that in her tongue it meant the one who brings light. He only knew that tomorrow, if she returned, he would have to answer. And for the first time in years, the question of what he wanted began to stir beneath the layers of dust and grief. Ethan barely slept that night. The air was thick, even after sunset, and the faint rattle of the shutters kept him awake long after the lantern had gone out. He sat by the table, fingers tracing the faded stitches on a child's cloth band. Outside, the crickets droned like a heartbeat that would not stop. He told himself he'd say no. Whatever the woman wanted, it wasn't his burden to carry. But as the horizon bled from indigo to gold, he found himself already walking toward the eastern fence. The same figure waited there, just as she'd promised. Her horse, a lean dun mare, stood grazing among the weeds. She turned when she heard his steps, her posture calm but deliberate, like someone who had spent a lifetime among things that could kill her if she hesitated. "You came back," Ethan said quietly. "I said I would," she replied. Her voice had a low, even rhythm, the kind that carried conviction rather than heat. He hesitated before speaking again. "You said you wanted a child. I don't understand. I don't ask for love or a husband," she said. "Only the chance to give life before my people vanish." The words hit him like a blunt stone, strange, heavy, and heartbreakingly earnest. She stepped closer, the beaded tassels on her sleeves catching the light. "You are a man who does not strike what is weaker. I saw you pour water for wild horses. I saw you mend fences, even when no one will pay you. You respect life. That is why I chose you." He stared at her, speechless. "You've been watching me for many days." Her lips curved, not quite a smile. "You work with patience. It means you still believe in something, even if you don't call it by name." Before he could answer, the sound of hooves rolled from the ridge. 3 riders appeared, 2 men and an older woman, all Apache. Their faces were hard as the rocks behind them. The woman's braids were streaked with silver, her gaze sharp as obsidian. "Ehala Yazzie," she said in a clipped tone. "Is this the man you spoke of?" Ehala didn't flinch. "Yes." The older woman's eyes flicked over Ethan, then narrowed. "A white man who hides behind fences. You shame us." The younger warriors exchanged words in Apache, low and biting. Ethan didn't understand, but the contempt was plain. One of them spat into the dust. Ahala's jaw tightened. "This is my choice," she said in English, her tone like iron wrapped in silk. "Not the council's. You forget your duty." The elder woman hissed. "Strength is what keeps us alive." "Then strength has made us deaf," Ehala shot back. "You think loudness is power. I have seen gentleness endure longer than rage." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Ethan could feel every muscle in his body tense. But he stayed still. He knew he was out of place in a battle he didn't understand. The older woman turned her horse sharply. "If you walk this path, child, you walk it alone." "I already do," Ehala said softly. Dust swirled as they rode off, leaving behind a taste of ash and sorrow. Ethan looked at her, then really looked. Not as a stranger, but as someone standing on the edge of exile, with her chin still lifted. "You didn't have to defend me," he said. "I wasn't defending you," she replied. "I was defending my right to choose." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain from the mountains. Ethan finally found his voice. "The storms will come soon," he said. "You should find shelter." Her eyes softened. "Maybe I already have." And before he could think of what that meant, she turned her horse and rode toward the horizon, the sound of her departure fading into the hum of the coming storm. By afternoon, the sky had turned the color of bruised steel, heat pressed down so thick that even the wind had stopped breathing. Ethan stood at the corral, squinting toward the horizon where dark clouds were stacking like mountains. The smell of rain-wet dust and static moved ahead of the storm. He didn't expect her to come back. Yet as thunder rolled across the valley, he saw a lone rider galloping through the haze, cloak snapping behind her like a flag. Ehala reined in her mare near the gate. "Your roof will give in before nightfall," she called, eyes narrowing at the warped boards. "You'll be crushed if you wait." Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow. "It's held this long, not against what's coming." She dismounted and tossed him a glance that was half challenge, half concern. "You have nails." He nodded, too surprised to argue. Moments later, They were both climbing onto the roof. The wind rose fast, hot at first, then cold as the front struck. Sheets of rain began to fall, hammering the boards. "Hand me that plank," she shouted over the storm. Her hair, loosened by the wind, lashed across her face. Ethan passed the board. Their fingers brushed warm, quick, electric. He tried not to think of it. The storm broke open in full. Lightning forked across the sky, bright enough to bleach the world to white. Ehala braced the ladder, steady and sure as a pillar, while Ethan nailed the last plank down. When he finally jumped to the ground, soaked to the bone, she was still there, hands gripping the ladder, eyes lifted to make sure he'd made it. The wind roared around them. For a heartbeat, everything was sound and light and breath. Then the rain softened, settling into a steady rhythm. Both of them stood in the shelter of the porch, dripping, panting, silent. "You could have stayed away," he said at last. "I don't run from storms," she replied. A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Besides, someone has to make sure you don't die from stubbornness." He laughed an awkward, rusty sound, like a hinge that hadn't been used in years. That night, the rain didn't stop. Water bled through the roof despite their work, but only in small rivulets, not collapse. Ehala stayed because the path back to the hills was washed out. She built a small fire in the hearth and sat cross-legged before it, drying her sleeves. Ethan watched her from the table, trying to read her silence. Her movements were graceful, efficient. Every gesture seemed practiced by necessity, not vanity. "When you said you needed a child," he began, voice low, "you meant to raise it. Here I meant to raise it free," she said simply. "Free from the rules of both worlds." Her eyes met his, steady and unguarded. "Our people are breaking apart. The government takes our children. The elders cling to ghosts. I will not let either decide for me." He nodded slowly. "And you think I can help you do that? I think you understand loss," she said. "And those who have lost everything do not take life lightly, for a long while." They listened to the rain. It filled the space between them with something that wasn't quite peace, but close. As midnight deepened, she spoke again. "In 6 days, the moon will be full. By then, I must decide marry the man they chose, or walk away forever. What happens if you walk away? I will no longer be Apache," she said quietly. "Not in their eyes." Ethan felt a pull in his chest, a recognition of exile he knew too well. When he finally rose to add wood to the fire, she caught his hand. "Fear isn't weakness," she said. "It only means we still value what we might lose." He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them: grief, respect, maybe the first flicker of trust. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The valley steamed under the new light, and the repaired roof held firm. Ehala stepped out to where the world smelled of wet earth and juniper. She closed her eyes, turned her face to the sun, and smiled faintly. Behind her, Ethan stood in the doorway, watching. For the first time in years, the sound of another person moving inside his home didn't feel like intrusion. It felt like breath returning to a long-buried place. The storm passed, but the air afterward felt charged, like the valley itself was holding its breath. The ground shimmered with puddles that would vanish by noon, leaving only a crust of white dust behind. Ethan and Ehala worked in silence that morning, feeding the horses, setting fallen fences upright, mending what the wind had torn loose. By mid-morning, Ethan caught her watching the horizon again. Her posture had changed, no longer calm, but alert. "They'll come," she said quietly. "The council will not let this go." He didn't answer. Deep down, he knew she was right. The desert had a way of carrying consequences. They were still tightening the last rail when the sound of hooves echoed through the heat. 4 riders appeared from the south ridge, silhouettes against the glare. At their front rode a tall man on a black horse, his braids tied with red cord and his face painted in streaks of ochre. "Terracotta Nashte," Ehala murmured, more to herself than to him. The rider stopped a dozen yards away. The man in front dismounted with slow, deliberate grace. He had the build of someone used to command, broad shoulders, scarred hands, eyes like flint sharpened by pride. "You've gone too far." "Ehala," he said in English, voice low but steady. "The council calls you back." "I'm not theirs to call," she replied. His gaze flicked toward Ethan. "You would leave your people for this man," he said. "Man the way one might say, ghost." Ehala stepped closer to Ethan, not as defiance, but as truth made visible. "I would leave them for the right to decide my own life." Terracotta's jaw clenched. "And you think he understands what it means to be hunted, to be hated?" Ethan met his eyes. "Maybe not. But I understand what it means to lose everything and keep breathing. For a heartbeat." Silence filled the space between them. Then Terracotta moved fast. He grabbed Ethan by the collar, pulling him close enough to smell the smoke and leather on his breath. "You think courage is silence," he growled. "Then stand still and prove it." Ethan didn't move. His heart hammered against his ribs, but he stood his ground. Terracotta raised his fist, stopped at a hair's breadth from Ethan's face, and held it there. Neither man blinked. The moment stretched. Thunder without sound, finally. Terracotta lowered his hand. He turned to Ehala, something raw flickering in his expression. "You shame me," he said, not as an insult, but as a confession, "because I envy what you've chosen." He looked back at Ethan, nodding once. "Do not make her regret it." Then he mounted his horse and rode off. The others followed, leaving a storm of dust in their wake. Ethan exhaled only after they disappeared into the hills. He hadn't realized how tightly his fists had been clenched. Ehala turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "You didn't fight back. I've seen enough fighting," he said. "Sometimes standing still takes more strength." That evening, as the sun bled into the valley, Ehala packed a small bundle of her things. "They will exile me," she said. "When the drums sound tonight, it means my name has been removed from the tribe." "Where will you go?" Ethan asked. She met his eyes. "Nowhere. Not unless you close your door to me." He didn't. When the first faint rhythm of drums drifted through the wind from far away, he stepped aside and let her in. The night deepened. Neither spoke. Outside, the sky flashed with distant lightning that never came close enough to rain. Ethan sat near the hearth while Ehala stood by the window, the faint glow of firelight softening the angles of her face. "You'll lose everything for this," he said. She turned, voice calm but certain. "No, I've already lost everything that wasn't worth keeping." She moved to the table and sat across from him. Between them lay the silence of people who no longer feared it. Hours passed before she spoke again. "Do you regret helping me?" He looked up slowly. "No. I think I'm only starting to remember what it feels like to live." Outside, the wind carried the last echo of the drums. Somewhere in that rhythm was both mourning and beginning. Ehala closed her eyes. "Then perhaps we are both reborn tonight." When she reached for his hand, he didn't pull away. The contact was simple, steady, two survivors anchoring each other in a world that no longer recognized them. By dawn, the air was cool again, the storm clouds gone. The desert stretched endless and quiet, but Dust Haven no longer felt empty. Ethan walked out to the corral, saw the footprints of her horse beside his own, and realized something had shifted irrevocably. Whatever lay ahead, fear, judgment, or exile, it would be faced together. The valley woke quiet the next morning. The air was clearer, washed clean by distant rain that had never reached them. Sunlight spilled across the hills, catching the steam rising from the ground like breath from the earth itself. Ethan stepped outside to the familiar creak of the porch, but it no longer sounded lonely. Ehala was already by the corral, mending a broken strap on the water barrel. The sleeves of her doeskin shirt were rolled to her elbows, her hair tied back with a strip of red cloth. She worked with quiet precision, as though each motion were a small prayer. He watched her for a long time before speaking. "You didn't have to start work this early." She glanced up, half smiling. The world doesn't wait for sorrow to end before it dries its tears. He found himself smiling too, for the first time in years. The sound of another voice at dawn didn't feel like intrusion. It felt like morning was speaking back. They spent the day rebuilding what the storm had undone. She helped him rehang the gate, taught him how to weave reeds tighter into the trough to hold water longer, how to read the wind's direction by how the dust curled near the ground. Ethan listened, surprised at how natural it felt to learn from her. At midday, they rested under the cottonwood near the well. She offered him a strip of dried venison, and he took it without hesitation. The silence between them was different now, no longer wary, but full of unspoken understanding. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked suddenly. He shook his head. "Dust Haven's all I have left." "Then maybe it's time to make it more than a memory," she said softly. That night, they shared supper by the hearth. The lamplight painted gold on the walls, the kind of warmth Ethan had forgotten could exist. Ehala stirred the stew, the scent of sage filling the air. She broke the quiet first. "The council's judgment is done. My name has been erased." He looked up. "What does that mean for you?" "It means I have no people," she said simply. "No clan, no songs that belong to me." He hesitated, then said, "You have this place now, and if you want, you can make new songs here." She looked at him, and for a moment he thought she might cry. Instead, she smiled faintly. "You speak as though you believe in second lives." He stirred the fire. "Maybe I do. Maybe I needed someone to remind me they're possible." The flames flickered across their faces, softening the years carved into his. Ehala's voice dropped low. "Ethan, if I stay, it won't be just for shelter. I'll raise a child here between two worlds. It will carry both names, both songs. Are you ready for that?" He thought of Clara's laughter, of little Lily's hands tugging at his sleeve, of the years spent avoiding every sound that reminded him of them. He looked toward the rafters where rainwater once leaked, now sealed tight by their work. The roof held steady. "I'm afraid," he said finally. Her gaze didn't waver. "Then we'll begin with fear. It's honest." He nodded. "I'll try. I'll learn." She reached across the table, took his hand in hers. That's all any of us ever do. Outside, the moon was nearly full round and pale. Rising from behind the Chiricahua Range, coyotes called from the far hills. The world felt balanced between endings and beginnings. Ethan stood and walked to the door. "Come," he said. She followed him out into the open air. The desert stretched silver beneath the moonlight. He turned to her, the wind tugging lightly at his shirt. "You once said you needed to give life before your people vanished." "Yes." "Then maybe it's not just your people you'll save." She didn't answer, only stepped closer, her fingers finding his. For a long time, they stood without words, letting the quiet wrap around them like something sacred. Later, as they sat by the fire, she unwrapped a small pouch from her belt, a handful of colored beads and sinew thread. Slowly, she began to string them together. "What's that?" he asked. "A sign of beginning," she said, "for the child we will raise." He nodded, eyes fixed on the delicate movement of her fingers, the patient rhythm of the thread weaving through each bead. The pattern grew turquoise, bone, amber, blood red, life itself, captured in color. When she finished, she handed it to him. "It will hang by the door," she said. "So this house remembers we chose courage." Ethan tied the strand to the doorway, where the lamplight caught it, making the beads shimmer like tiny suns. He turned back toward her. "You should rest. Tomorrow we'll ride into Dry Creek. There's seed and lumber to trade." Her lips curved. "You'll bring me into town." "They'll talk either way," he said with a shrug. "Let them see what strength looks like when it's quiet." Her laughter was soft, almost shy, the kind of sound that healed simply by existing. When she finally lay down by the hearth, he watched the glow of the fire ripple across her face. It struck him that for the first time in years, his home looked lived in. The ghosts that had haunted the corners seemed to fade with the smoke. He closed his eyes, the echo of her words drifting through him. Fear is honest. And for once, he didn't fight it. 2 weeks passed before anyone came down the trail again. Ethan was splitting firewood behind the barn when the call of a lone rider drifted across the valley. The sound was not hostile, measured, deliberate. Ehala stepped out of the doorway, her hand resting near the small knife at her belt. Not in fear, but habit. The rider was an older woman, wrapped in a blanket patterned with faded turquoise diamonds. Her hair, long and silver, caught the sun like strands of smoke. Ethan recognized her from that day by the fence, the elder who had once condemned them both. "Ehala Yazzie," Ehala whispered. The woman stopped several yards away, dismounted, and stood in the dust. Her face was no longer carved with anger, only with years. "You built this place well," she said. "It stands stronger than before." Ethan nodded, uncertain if she spoke of the ranch or of them. Ehala drew a small pouch from her saddlebag and held it out. "This was your grandmother's," she said. "Untold Yazzie. She, too, married a man with pale skin, though the world called it betrayal. I was her sister." Ehala's breath caught. "I thought you hated me." The elder shook her head. "I feared for you, but fear can be mistaken for hatred when it is left too long in the dark." Ehala placed the pouch in her hands. Inside lay a beaded bracelet, the thread worn soft by time. The council argued. She continued. "Some wanted your name erased forever, but Terracotta spoke for you. He said no tribe survives by caging its women." Her gaze softened. He remembered his mother, what was done to her when she had no choice. Ehala bowed her head, her voice trembling. "And the child, if it is born under this sky, it will still be of us," the elder said. "But you must teach it both languages. One for the heart, one for the world." Ethan stepped forward. "Then I will learn yours." Ahana's eyes met his, and for the first time, she smiled. "Good. The desert does not keep what refuses to listen." Then she turned her horse toward the ridge. "Courage runs in your blood," she said over her shoulder. "Don't let it dry." When she was gone, the silence felt vast but kind. Ehala opened the pouch again, her hands shaking. She fastened the old bracelet around her wrist, tears glinting in the sunlight. Ethan moved closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. She turned into him, pressing his hand against her stomach. "Here," she whispered, "where life begins." He didn't speak. The words would have broken something sacred. Instead, he looked toward the hills where clouds were gathering once more, the first hints of another storm. But this time, he did not dread it. Storms would come. Roofs would break again. Life would test every joint they'd built. But he had learned the truth she'd carried all along. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to stand when the world demanded you kneel. That night, the fire burned low. Ehala hummed a lullaby from her childhood, the tune carrying softly through the room. Ethan recognized the rhythm, a song of home, not loss. He joined her with a rough baritone hum of an old hymn Clara once sang. Two melodies, one Apache. One white wove together until the line between them disappeared. Outside, the wind moved gently across the valley. The repaired roof held firm, and the small beaded strand by the door caught the firelight, glowing like a line of tiny suns. Dust Haven was no longer just a name. It was a promise of two people who had chosen to build love where nothing should have survived. If this story found a place in you, come back tomorrow. Here, we keep the Old West alive with quiet courage, hard choices, and love that learns to listen across two worlds. Each day, you'll find another chapter of dust, wind, and human dignity tales that linger after the fire goes out. Travel with us through valleys of loss and roofs rebuilt, where small mercies change the course of lives. Keep this campfire on your map. There'll always be a warm seat and a new story waiting.